In the dim-lit stable, with the cool night breeze rustling through the hay, Gary found himself facing the reality of his plan. He leaned against the stable wall, his gaze falling on the empty carriage that would serve as the vessel for his daring escape. The enormity of the risk he was about to take was beginning to sink in, filling the air with a palpable tension. "Freedom ain't never come easy, Gary," John started, breaking the silence. "It ain't just about leaving. It's about surviving. You ready to risk your life for this?" Gary's heart pounded in his chest, the gravity of John's words resonating with the anxiety that lay buried deep within him. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, the possibility of capture, torture, even death. "I know the risks, John," Gary said, his voice barely a whisper. "But it's a risk I'm willing to take if it means a chance at freedom." "But what about your family, Gary?" John continued, his brow furrowed with concern. "What about Amy? What about us?" Gary paused, his thoughts turning to Amy and the others left behind. A pang of guilt shot through him, his heart aching for the family he was leaving behind. But even in the face of these emotions, his resolve did not waver. "I'm doing this for Amy. For all of us," Gary said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "If I can find freedom, maybe I can help others find it too." His words hung in the air, a promise of a brighter future that felt just within reach, yet so far away. But the look in Gary's eyes, the resolute determination that shone in the dim light, spoke volumes. This wasn't just a risk, it was a necessary gamble, a leap of faith towards a chance at freedom. As the conversation wound down, a newfound understanding passing between the two men, the stable fell silent once more. All that remained was the gentle rustle of hay and the steady rhythm of the horses' breathing, serving as a constant reminder of the daring journey that lay ahead. In the face of danger and uncertainty, Gary's resolution remained unbroken. He was ready to confront the risks, ready to gamble everything for a shot at freedom. The whispers of rebellion had turned into roars within him, echoing his silent determination to break the chains of servitude, no matter the cost. As Sunday dawned on the Harrison plantation, a peculiar sense of anticipation hung in the air. The sun cast long shadows that stretched over the fields, a symbol of time quietly slipping away. For Gary, it was his final day as a slave, his last Sunday under the oppressive yoke of servitude. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, the reality of his decision beginning to set in. He found himself rising early that day, even before the cockerel had announced the dawn. Gary walked along the periphery of the fields, looking out at the vast expanse of the plantation. He touched the rough bark of the tree under which he'd played as a child, the tree that had witnessed countless moments of his life and would stand long after he had gone. The feeling of finality was poignant. "I see you're up early, Gary," came the soft voice of Amy from behind him. She stood a few steps away, her eyes meeting his in the gentle morning light. "I guess I couldn't sleep," Gary confessed, forcing a weak smile onto his face. "Just wanted to take it all in." Amy nodded, understanding his unsaid words. "You're scared, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'd be a fool not to be," Gary responded, the honesty in his words slicing through the tension. "But I am also hopeful, Amy. Hopeful that I'll find a life beyond these fields, a life where I can be my own man." Amy reached out, her fingers brushing against his. It was a silent promise of support, a shared understanding of the journey he was about to embark on. Throughout the day, Gary carried out his duties with a sense of detachment. He watched as the other slaves toiled under the hot sun, their bodies drenched in sweat. He listened to the crack of the whip, the hushed whispers, the quiet prayers, all with the knowledge that he would soon be free from it all. At sundown, as he drove the carriage back from the church, Gary stole a glance at the Harrison mansion in the rear. The mirror, the majestic building, a symbol of his oppression, seemed to shrink with distance, growing smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a speck on the horizon. Gary felt a sense of weight lifting from his shoulders, the chains of his bondage loosening with every mile he put between himself and the plantation. The fear was still present, but it was now tinged with hope. Hope for a future that was his own. Hope for a life of freedom. His last Sunday on the plantation was not a day of despair, but a day of liberation. The dawn of a new beginning. As the evening drew to a close, Gary completed his duties one last time, taking care of the horses that had carried the Harrisons to and from the church. His heart pounded in his chest with every passing moment, the hands of the clock seeming to move slower than ever. The finality of his chores left a bittersweet taste in his mouth. These horses, once a symbol of his bondage, now stood as his key to freedom, their mighty hooves pounding the path that would lead him away from the life he had always known. With the night settling in, Gary made his way back to the slave quarters, a shack he had shared with John and Norris. He found Norris nursing a bottle of whiskey, the amber liquid glinting in the faint candlelight. "You're back late, Gary," Norris noted, his voice slightly slurred. "Everything all right?" Gary hesitated for a moment before responding. "Just wrapping up my duties," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. It was a long day. Norris nodded, a hint of suspicion in his eyes. However, the alcohol seemed to dull his instincts, and he returned his attention to the bottle. "Well, better get some rest then. Tomorrow is another long day." Little did Norris know, tomorrow would be a day like no other. Gary went to his corner of the shack, his mind filled with a whirlwind of thoughts. He lay there in the dim light, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling until sleep took him. Gary awoke before the dawn, the stillness of the plantation broken only by the distant hooting of an owl. He dressed silently, his belongings bundled into a small sack. The dim light of the dying candle barely illuminated the room, casting long, ominous shadows that danced on the walls. Stepping out into the chilly morning air, Gary looked back at the quarters, the plantation, and his life as a slave one last time. It was an image that would remain etched in his memory, a stark reminder of the chains he was breaking. As he climbed onto the carriage, the horses whinnied, sensing the tension in their handler. "Easy now," Gary whispered, patting the horse gently. He cracked the whip and the carriage lurched forward, making its way down the path leading away from the plantation. Freedom lay ahead, vast and unknown, beckoning him towards it. His heart pounded in his chest, the only sound breaking the deafening silence of the pre-dawn darkness. He was leaving his past behind, embarking on a journey towards freedom, towards the unknown. The wheels of the carriage carried him further and further away from the plantation, away from a life of servitude, towards a new dawn. As the Harrison plantation receded into the distance, Gary could not help but look back one last time. "Goodbye," he whispered into the wind, his voice filled with a mix of relief, excitement, and a hint of fear. But overriding all else was hope. Hope that the road ahead would lead him to a life he could call his own. And with that final glance, Gary set off, leaving behind his life as a slave and embarking on his journey towards freedom.